Racism in Britain is on the rise. That's according to a new European report. Now the UK government wants companies to declare the number of foreigners they employ. Will that make the situation worse? And is this part of a growing anti-foreigner sentiment across Europe? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Folly Thibault. The UK's new Home Secretary wants to, quote, prevent migrants taking jobs British people can do. Amber Rudd unveiled parts of her new immigration plan at the Conservative Party conference this week. Critics say it feeds anti-foreigner sentiment, something that's already a growing problem in the UK, according to the European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance. The organisation released a report this week that says progress has been made with laws, including the Equality Act, which was passed in 2010, and the government's hate crime action plan that was developed last year. But there's been a rise in hate speech, both in traditional media and online. And the report says there's been an increase in violent hate crimes involving racism, homophobia and anti-Semitism. Many of these incidents go unpunished. The Commission says people who want to sue their employers for discrimination are discouraged by unfairly high fees. And politicians are accused of fueling hatred of homosexuals, foreigners and especially Muslims. While the Commission specifically criticised former UK Prime Minister David Cameron over his response to refugees on the UK-French border in July 2015. He said, "You have got a swarm of people coming across the Mediterranean seeking a better life, wanting to come to Britain." Because he used the word swarm, Cameron was accused of likening refugees to insects. Now, the ECRI report also accused far-right politician Nigel Farage of stoking xenophobic sentiments.
We see, as I warned earlier, evidence that ISIS are now using this route to put their jihadists on European soil. We must be mad to take this risk with the cohesion of our societies.
Well, let's bring in our guests now for today's Inside Story. In London, we have Denis, Fernando, spokesman for Unite Against Fascism. In Strasbourg, France, Francois Reyes, founder of Reveil Citoyen, a French think tank that promotes intercultural dialogue. And in Brussels, Claire Fernandez, deputy director of the European Network Against Racism. Welcome to you all. Thank you for being on Inside Story. If I can start with you, Denis, Fernando, in London. This report by the European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance covers a period of 5 years up until March of this year, so before the Brexit vote. But the vote, this, according to various reports and statistics, has triggered a further rise in hate crimes in the UK, a further rise in anti-foreigner sentiment. So do you think there's been a shift in public attitude since Brexit? Has it become permissible now to attack immigrants in the UK?
I think the problem is that what you saw before Brexit was a whole lot of anti-migrant rhetoric that was utilised as part of the Brexit debate. And now that this vote has happened, there are a whole number of people out there who are now feeling vindicated as a result of that. And that is why you are seeing this spike in terms of the rise in racist attacks and various other incidents. So it is of huge concern to us here in Britain at the moment.
When the Home Secretary says that businesses will be forced to reveal how many foreigners they employ under the government's plans to force, companies to hire more British people, do you think that feeds into the anti-racism sentiment, the racism sentiment that we're seeing, or is it a consequence of it?
I think it's a bit of both. I think that you can't get around the fact that in Britain today, it is a diverse workforce which is making Britain a very, very successful place. That is what is very important to Britain, and therefore picking out groups in the way that the Home Secretary has done is of huge concern to us, because why should a company have to publish and sort of publicise who works for it in this way, shape and form? And the CBI has rubbished these proposals and said that this is going to have a huge effect in terms of business. They're saying that, and what we're saying is that this is stoking the climate that we've seen post-Brexit, because it's in some way way pandering to and capitulating to this crude numbers game that the government is hell-bent on playing when it comes to the issue of immigration. And that isn't the way that a successful society works. When you look at things like the National Health Service, when you look at public services, it's actually the contribution of many different communities, including migrant communities, that is making those things successful. So why stigmatize a group of people in this way?
Let's bring in Claire now in Brussels, Claire Fernandez. There are many people who say, of course, that Brexit unleashed the racist sentiment in the UK that we're seeing today. What is the situation elsewhere in Europe? Is there an upward trend also in hate crimes elsewhere in Europe? And what's stoking it if it's the case?
Well, definitely the situation in the UK in the post-referendum period has been really appalling, and we see a huge surge in numbers with like 57% rise in hate crime in the 4 days that have followed the result. But this builds, as the previous speaker said, on a trend of rise in hate crime in the UK, and definitely as the European Network Against Racism, we've seen this trend throughout Europe, being from hate speech or hate crime, arson attacks against migrants in Eastern Europe, but also in Germany, a rise in Islamophobic crime. For example, in France, we have seen an 80% rise in between 2014 and 2015 in Islamic violence, but also anti-Semitic crime and attacks. So we definitely see a trend throughout Europe. We believe that this is no surprise for us because it's not coming out of nowhere. We've seen politicians building into fear-mongering and building a sense that migrants and minorities are here, are clearly linked to terrorism, are clearly here to take jobs. So they create this climate through media, social media, but also normal media, where people feel they're entitled to either discriminate or commit act of violence against migrants and minorities. We also see the effect of some policies that would perpetuate structural racism. For example, some of the counter-terrorism policies that we've seen developed throughout the European Union have clearly associated terrorism and Muslims, and that creates a climate of suspicion that would then make it acceptable in society for acts of violence.
Well, let's take a closer look at this report. The European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance says that the trends outlined in this UK report stand true across Europe, as you were saying, Claire. There were more than 200 attacks against homes belonging to refugees in Germany, for instance, in the first half of this year. Anti-immigrant parties in France, the Netherlands and Austria have all become more popular as well. Politicians want to build walls in Hungary and France to keep out migrants and refugees. And some European politicians have also called for the end of visa-free travel in Europe. So, Francois, in Strasbourg, this call for end of visa-free travel is something that Marine Le Pen, the far-right leader in France, wants, the end of Schengen. Do tell us about France specifically, the situation there. Of course, the anti-immigrant parties have been there. The far-right National Front has been present in French politics for a while now. Why do you think more people are turning towards it now? Why is it that Marine Le Pen is seen as a key contender for the upcoming election in 2017?
Well, there are many questions here, but I think it comes from a historic background. In the 80s, the rise of Islamophobia and racism started to grow, and then we entered a new millennium, and that did not calm the things down because everything got hit up by the politicians that wanted to steal away from traditional main parties, that wanted to steal away the voters of the extreme right parties. And as you said, in Denmark, in the Netherlands, in Austria, in Italy, in Hungary, in Slovakia, and in France especially, xenophobic parties have gotten more and more voters. So why is that? They are actually on very prosperous grounds here in France. We've had 3 terrorist attacks, 3 main terrorist attacks, 7 in total, with more than 250 people killed. And that can only fuel xenophobia and racism when our actual governments do not do anything to fight efficiently against terrorism and do not try to slow down things in parts of France that are being stigmatized.
But this is
because
not a
they're
new
welcoming.
phenomenon, Francois, in France. I mean, politicians have used inherent racism
Absolutely.
and prejudice in their populations for a long time. I mean, and terrorism is not new also in France. This has been going on for some time now. Why has it become worse in the last 2-3 years?
Well, of course, terrorism existed in France before. The threat of terrorism existed in France before. But the real effects of terrorism, we felt it in the 2 last years, not in the last 10 years, in the 2 last years. And it was Islamic, claimed to be Islamic terrorism that impacted France. And so the politicians did not try to explain that it did not resemble what Islam actually looked like. They made the link between Islam and terrorism in such a way that it grew the racist feeling in France. And the only candidate that openly speaks about it is Marine Le Pen. We have to keep in mind that Marine Le Pen is someone who said that the Nazi occupation in France was not so terrible. It's someone that will say anything to get more voters, and voters do feel like the state is leaving them on the side. And if saying racist sentences based on actual facts, but twisted facts, then they're going to do it. Right. And even Sarkozy, the former president of France, is trying today to make such allegations.
So, yeah, so political parties are exploiting this, in your opinion. Let's come back to Denis in London for more on the situation in the UK. The report by ICRI says that racial inequality is also getting worse, with young black and ethnic minorities suffering what it calls institutional racism. Denis, and unfairness in the fields of education. What exactly are they talking about here? How does that factor, how does that work in everyday society there in the UK?
Well, if you're a young black person in Britain today, you're less likely to end up with a job after graduation. You are more likely to be unemployed overall. There are a whole number of statistics in which, as young black people, institutional racism is having a huge impact on people's lives. And therefore, it is something that does need challenging and isn't, I don't think, adequately being audited or adequately being challenged by the current government.
But Britain has not become a racist country overnight, has it, Denis? I mean, the traditional feeling and this dislike for foreigners has always been present. How do you explain that it's increased there in recent years? Same question that I asked Francois in France. How do you explain this increase in recent years?
Well, I think it's partly due to the economic crisis. I think that in the middle of an economic crisis, scapegoats are found for why everyone is feeling the tough times. And unfortunately, we're seeing a situation at the moment where migrants are being blamed for jobs and for various other strains on public services, when actually it's the economic crisis and the way that the economic crisis is being dealt with by governments that is the actual problem. But it's an easy scapegoat because these are communities that are vulnerable, that don't yet have a voice on the political platform in the way that others do, and can be scapegoated in this way. And so that is really our concern, and that is why we think that this has led to a rise in overall hostility. But also, if you as a government, if you as a policymaker are going to keep making these kind of arguments, similarly against the Muslim community at the moment, similar arguments are made around the Muslim community, which is also one of the most disadvantaged and poorest communities in Britain. If you keep making those arguments, then it is no surprise that the far right then come in and exploit that and claim to grow out of it, because they say, yes, there is a problem. The problem is what the politicians say, but we are the answer, not them. And that's how they grow out of this. So then there is unfortunately a capitulation that's happening in mainstream politics to more far-right forces, UKIP and others.
Claire, Fernandez, both Francois and Denis here have blamed politicians, of course. But what about the media's role in this? What about the media's role in spreading intolerance and hate?
Well, I'd like to second the comments on politicians, because not only just the far right, but as Denis said, the whole political spectrum has now shifted to the right and used the far right rhetoric in order to gain votes, in trying to ostracize the far right and say, well, you know, you should vote for us because we will also address issues of migrations and terrorism. But that in fact actually just contributes to perpetrating these ideas of far-right and xenophobic and racist ideas, first of all. And media are just contributing to this tendency in a context where we use more and more social media, where people tend to read less facts-based analysis and experts, but tend to react to quick emotional videos where they look at their own social media constituency basis and trying to re-emphasize their beliefs and systems of beliefs. So definitely the media has a role in that, but you can't obviously blame the entirety of media community in that aspect. And also we often blame IT companies and social media like Facebook and Twitter for online hate speech, but actually only illegal hate speech can be removed from the internet. But you have to know that about 80% of what's on the internet is not actually illegal, but it's just offensive. And therefore we see that you have to look more at how to prevent and develop counter narratives to these xenophobic narratives, rather than just ask for social media and media to remove online hate speech.
Okay, Francois, what are your thoughts on the media's role? Do you think they're contributing, as Claire says, or are they in fact the starting point of this problem, of the situation? Are they the one that's creating the problems in the first place?
Well, if I could just complete, I agree with everything Claire said, actually, and the point is the danger is not extreme thoughts because they're illegal. You can't say it, and we have laws banning them. But they are the most soft one, the one that you can write on Facebook, on Twitter, and spread through social medias. These ones are calling for some form of education on long term. But to answer to your questions about the media exactly, no, the media are not directly responsible for this, but they are encouraging a form of discrimination, a form of xenophobia. In France, we had this big news of when the veil was banned, the Islamic veil was banned on the beaches in the south of France. And we've heard it for 3 entire weeks. Not one day passed without some news alert on our phones saying where some mayor has taken some movements to ban that, or the court does not allow the veil to be banned. We've heard about it for 3 weeks, and now it calmed down. So the media has a responsibility to not spread too much violence and hate in the hearts of people. And when you speak about it, age 24, then you do fuel hate.
Right.
So you can speak, of course, about what's happening, about the news, but you cannot do your entire social media platform and invade it with only this news, because this is going to make people angry, both toward the media and toward the government that for them doesn't take action, and also against the media itself.
Denis, do you agree with that? Francois says while the media has played a role in this, it's not directly responsible for spreading hate in their societies, their respective societies. Tell us about the case in the UK. What do you think the media's role has been in all this, fueling this racist sentiment that we're seeing on the rise in the UK today?
Well, I know that the report that has just come out has actually said that the media does play a role in all of this, and I think it's good that the aspects of the media are being called out. There are good media outlets which do report, for example, on the plight of refugees and do not pander to this kind of rhetoric that David Cameron used. However, there is a prevalent and very powerful, influential media out there which does, unfortunately, say things around refugees, around Muslim communities, around Eastern Europeans. There was a whole thing before the accession states, for example, in Britain, where we were under the impression we were going to be flooded with Eastern Europeans coming into the country, and it was non-existent. That did not happen. We were actually at the same time being flooded by water, which was flooding parts of the countryside and parts of Britain. But this story, in the same way that the speaker just talked about the burkini ban, managed to dominate the headlines that to the point where people were distracted from talking to their leaders about being flooded by water and were instead hysterical about Eastern Europeans who were going to come on the 1st of January. So the media does play a very, very important role in these issues. And then that does, if not challenged from the authority of politicians, if they do not stand up and give the lead, then it is kind of a green light to bits of the media to go, well, if the politicians, if the authorities are saying this, this can now be a story. Whereas if the politicians gave the lead and said, no, we aren't going to talk about migrants, Muslims, refugees in this way, then that would be the green light to the media, and would encourage those in the media who would want to speak about this being the story. They would do it in a more positive way. But there is definitely a lock together between the two, and it's for people to stand up to it and to make their views known on it.
Claire, in Brussels, when it comes to policy, how best then do we combat hate speech? I mean, are there sanctions against politicians being applied at the European level? I know that at the European Parliament there are fines for hate speech, but is that being respected? Are politicians? Do they realize that? I mean, does that make them not want to use hate speech?
In the European Parliament, you have to know that members of the European Parliament are only liable, are not liable criminally for what they say within the European Parliament. So they only subject to administrative fines, and we had a number of examples in this mandate. But the fines are ridiculously low compared to what members of the European Parliament make. I think it's about 3,000 euros, which is really low and not dissuasive enough. So what we're trying to do is to work on the rules of procedures together with like-minded MEPs to try to increase that sanctions and make sure that it's more systematic and dissuasive, and that it applies not only to what it says in the plenary sessions, but also in committees, within political parties, and so on. Then, of course, whatever is said by politicians outside of the European Parliament and in another context depends on whether or not domestic courts would ask for the parliament's immunity, the parliamentarians' immunities to be lifted. And we have had a number of cases, for example, in the case of Marine Le Pen.
Right.
But indeed, we need stronger sanctions, but we also need political parties to take their responsibilities in their members and making sure that they are sanctioned also politically and not being able to continue.
Okay, Francois, do you agree with that? We need stronger sanctions, and what in your view needs to happen to remove this climate of hate that we're seeing across Europe right now?
A politician, the best of the world, in a unicorn world, would be the reflection of the best in us. The truth is they are not. And if they are not, and if they're spreading hate, both inside the parliament, whether it's European or national, whether it's in a public reunion, even if it's in their personal life, then they should be liable and they should answer to some courts or to the people for what they said, because they cannot go and talk to people and have an influence on them, because just like the media, they have an influence on the general public. They should not be able to spread violence and hate and xenophobia through their job being representing us.
Okay.
So we should, of course, ensure that there are sanctions, not fines, well, maybe fines with something else, something more restraining. But we should, of course, think about sanctioning them way harder than it is right now.
Okay, let's give the last word to Fernando in London. Briefly, Fernando, what do you think needs to happen when it comes to policy to combat hate speech and, curb the rise of racist incidents in the UK in particular? And also, how do you address public anxiety over immigration and identity?
Well, I think on the issue of hate speech and hate crime, I think that needs to have very, very tough sanctions when it comes to the law. I think that's very important. I think politicians should be held accountable. For example, when unfair things were said about the Muslim mayor of London, who is now the mayor of London, in that campaign things were said about him that were trying to tarnish him with extremism, which are clearly untrue. London is carrying on as a world-class city at the moment, so those sort of things that were said need to be taken up, and parliamentary privilege was one of the things that your other speakers have described, which was used in order to say and tarnish his name in those ways. And then finally, on the issue of immigration and diversity, I just think that these are positive things in society. Our NHS could not survive without the input and the work of migrant workers in it, and our society is stronger as it. That needs to be said to allay fears.
Okay, thank you so very much for a very interesting discussion. Thank you, Denis, Fernando, Francois Reyes and Claire Fernandez. Thank you all for taking part in this edition of Inside Story. And thank you as well for watching. You can always watch this program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter, of course. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Folly, Thibault, and the whole team, thanks for watching. Bye for now.